Hello and greetings to all of my beautiful listeners. So today, what are we going to be talking about? We're talking about excuse me, I really should have done my vocal warm-ups before I started rolling, but no take two in life, so no take two on YouTube. So today we're going to be talking about materialism and idealism. Again, following up from my last two videos, we're going to be comparing the two. Why should one choose to be a materialist? Why should one choose to be an idealist? What do the two have to offer? What is really the difference kind of between the two? So as we learned, idealism is when you view the world, the universe, the cosmos, as composed of two substances, one being, matter or whatever, and the other being something usually referred to as spirit. And again, there's some people like Bishop Berkeley who think that it's actually just spirit and there's no such thing as matter, but generally speaking, most idealists think that it's a combination of the two. So when you have that view that there is that there are these two different substances which commingle, Descartes was never really able to sufficiently articulate how those two things were able to commingle in the body. Maybe if he knew more about the brain, he would have been able to get closer to a more robust theory of that actual interface between the two different substances. But anyway, the idea is here that when you have a non-material substance and a material substance, the non-material substance is always going to take some kind of precedence. And that leads you to being able to, on the basis of your idealism, make absolute and universal claims about things. That is really in the greatest works of idealist philosophy, the principal motivation for why people theorize in this way, why people would suppose that there are these two different substances, that there is something called spirit, is because they nihilism, the threat of nihilism is really the motivating force behind pretty much all philosophy throughout history. But you kind of need to suppose that there is a spirit substance, a non-material substance, in order to make universal truth claims, in order to make epistemologically verifiable truth claims, which is really the only basis on which you can say that, there's such a thing as truth and thereby avoid being a nihilist. I mean, that's what they thought before Kierkegaard, let's say. We don't talk about the other guy on this channel, but so yeah, when you're an idealist, you inevitably, whether or not you are going to intentionally subordinate matter to spirit, you the idea of idealism is that you want to make universal truth claims. You want to make claims that are true in every case throughout, throughout all possibility, throughout the cosmos. So the most illustrative example of this, most famous and easy to understand example of this, is Kant's categorical imperative, where he says that you should not, you should not do something unless you should not do something unless you can wish that everybody do it all the time, basically. The idea being that's you would not do something like steal, for example, because if you wished that everybody stole all the time, then the society would not be able to function. So you should not be doing things that you cannot condone socially that you cannot condone universally. I mean, socially is like a limited sense. We're talking epistemology here, so this like applies universally and absolutely. The idea of idealism is that you can make, and logically you're going to end up making these kinds of universal and absolute truth claims. Whereas with materialism, you don't really have such a basis for making those kinds of claims, because you like everything that exists in the world is made of the same substance, so everything is kind of on an equal footing, and you're always going to be open to new data. I mean, it's worth noting, it's important to note that especially for us Marxists, us communists out here, but when you are a materialist, especially when you're a materialist after Marx, you are not going to make these kinds of epistemologically absolute claims such as Kant made. Like, there's no real possibility for a categorical imperative within a materialist philosophical framework. But you can still make like what are effectively absolute claims, like within, for example, the consideration of human society and like social affairs, for example. It's a limited data set. Like, it's a complex data set. It's an ever-changing, ever-expanding data set, but ultimately it is a limited data set. And the same goes for the entire universe, like, I mean, like, everything is ultimately knowable. It's just a matter of finding it out. I don't know if I actually believe that, but within like ultimately, I don't really think that you can know everything, because I think the more closely you look at an atom, for example, the more it is just going to break up, and you're going to just continue finding smaller and smaller particles forever. But if you take a limited data set, again, we'll just stick with the example of human society, then there's a potential to know everything that is of relevance. So you can make claims that are not universal and absolute in the epistemological sense. Like, they do not have this same kind of like metaphysical certainty that the idealist has, but they are effectively certain, again, because like human affairs, as complex as they are, they're limited and predictable. But like, again, as Marxists, I'll just try to develop this a little bit more. I mean, like, the truth is that like history obviously is ongoing. It's a process through time, and human society is changing, constantly developing, expanding. The data set is constantly developing and expanding. So what is really important is not to try to make like some grand theory of society, which may or may not be true for like a given historical period, but rather to come up with a method, a truth process that is able to account, that has like the conceptual kind of apparatus to account for what is, in the example of human society, and also to incorporate new data, incorporate new information. So that is what Orthodox Marxism is. It is not necessarily being tied to one like particular revolutionary framework like Leninism or Maoism, or whatever else, like communization. We talk about that a lot on this channel. It is not being tied to one particular framework, but it's being tied to the method itself, the method of historical materialism, the method of looking at history as, a set of like developing historical forces that, like, even though new data is constantly being offered up by like new combinations of like social forces, you're still able to like incorporate these things and move from one paradigm to another. It's the exact same thing as any other science. I'll talk more about that in the future, but for now I just want to talk about kind of like the difference between materialism and idealism, and I guess try to like make a pitch for what the two have to offer. So in the case of idealism, you get the possibility of making of like just fully avoiding nihilism. Like you're safe from the scariness of the void. You don't have to worry about the fact that there is no such thing as truth. Ultimately, you can rest assured and just like wrap yourself up in the warm cocoon of the categorical imperative. It's very reassuring. It's very cozy. The first critique doesn't often sound like cozy, but it's kind of weird to describe it as such. But the fact is that it is much safer to be to be an idealist, because sorry, I just got distracted by some people, but it's much safer to be an idealist because like you get to fully avoid the threat of nihilism, whereas with materialism you have to actually do the work of figuring out what is true for whatever particular case, and actually like collecting the data and like refining things and like changing things and actually like investigating your material conditions. Like this whole video series is really inspired by like the overuse I see of that phrase, the material conditions. The material conditions have finally become relevant to us. Now we can actually talk about that in a meaningful sense. But so that's that. And something that I just wanted to kind of hang a lantern on is that this view of materialism that I've outlined is, in fact, it sounds pretty nihilistic, and nihilism is not a good thing. We don't want to be nihilists. As much as I kind of like make fun of idealists for concocting their whole worldview out of fear of the absence of universal truths, we still don't want to be nihilists. It's not like a healthy mindset to have. Whether or not like your idea of philosophical nihilism is more refined than like the popular conception of just being like a doomer or whatever. But we don't want to be nihilists. So just to hang a lantern on this idea here, that the idea of materialism offering truths that are kind of like effectively universal within a limited paradigm, but like still not really allowing for this kind of epistemological certainty that you need in order to avoid becoming a nihilist. The idea here, my view of this, is that we are still in a period of prehistory. We still do not know what it means to be human. We are still at the stage of figuring out how to like provide the conditions for becoming human, meaning that science is not useful to human beings. It is only useful for developing the material conditions to the point where you can, start learning what it means to be human. Eventually, once we use science, once we use revolutionary science to achieve, a communist utopia, at that point, we will be able to abandon science because it's fucking useless. Science doesn't give us anything about what it means to be human. I'm out of time here, but I'll see you next time.